Hi, my name's Rich Harrington, and welcome to this week's edition of Producing Video Podcast, the podcast for professional podcasters. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about interview techniques for on-camera interviews. And this is tough. Not everybody has formal training in how to be a good interviewer. Fortunately, I actually studied to be a broadcast journalist, so it helped. We had lots of training. What I'm going to attempt to do in the next few minutes is condense some of the key things we learned about interview techniques. First off, make sure you put your interview subject at ease. One of the best ways to do this is to come prepared for the interview. So you should already know their name, if at all possible, and a little bit about their background. By doing your homework ahead of time, they're going to be more comfortable with you because you've shown a genuine interest in them. Next, try to just discuss with them what you're trying to accomplish. Don't lay out a big master plan or try to set it up, but I often share with folks that I only need them to tell me what they do. For example, if I say to someone, look, we're just going to talk about what you do for a living, or we're going to talk about what you really believe in. And if you mess up, it's okay. I won't use that part. Just putting people's minds at ease will go a long way in getting them more comfortable on camera. To that fact, make sure it's a genuine conversation. Don't be worried so much about if they say something a little bit off. Just let them talk. Get them engaged and have a real conversation with you, and it'll be much more interesting to the end audience. One of the worst things you could do is get obsessed over things like, could you please repeat my question in your answer? Or, could you say that slower? Just let them talk. Get them actively discussing the issues with you, whatever they're interested in, and it'll be a much better interview. But remember, you always have editing. And to that fact, you should make sure you have some extra camera angles or footage to cover it up. By taking off the pressure of always having to stay on that interview, you could really make it easier in the edit suite. So be sure to gather some footage of them doing things, interacting with you, demonstrating their product, etc., and that'll help a lot when you put that interview together. Even simple things like stock photos or promotional footage that they might be able to provide to you will help you cover up some of those edits. Now, a couple more things. When you're talking to them, don't be afraid to do a follow-up question. For example, I might ask somebody a question and get a great answer, buried in the middle with a bunch of crud. It's okay to do a follow-up question such as, well, that's really interesting. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? Or, well, those are a lot of good reasons. What do you think is the most compelling reason for someone to do that? By you getting them to focus or narrow down their answer, you're essentially editing right within the camera. So by doing these sorts of things, it really works. You get better interviews, they sound more natural, and it's a better conversation, which then travels over to the audience when they're watching. A couple more things I like to point out. Maintain eye contact with your subject. Smile and nod. Encourage them. If you have your head down and you're just buried in your notes, well, it doesn't really make for a good interview. The person feels like they're being grilled, and they're just going to keep talking and saying whatever they want because they want you to be happy on some level, but you're not giving them any feedback. Smile, nod, make sure you're engaged. If you're not understanding them, give them an inquisitive look, but actually make sure that you are engaging them in a conversation. Likewise, don't ask terribly long questions. Sometimes I'll shake things up with just a short question or tell me more. Why do you think that? Really, that's interesting. How come? These short little things will often spur people on to new thoughts and refine it. Lastly, when you're talking with folks, make sure that they feel comfortable. You could do this by explaining how the video is going to be used, by just having a short on-camera conversation ahead of time, or better yet, off-camera, where you introduce yourself. Let them know that at any point in time, if they feel uncomfortable or they want to stop and do something over again, that you'll let them. You're not generally going to be acting as an investigative journalist. Your role is to not make your subjects feel uncomfortable or on the spot. That's not to say be a pushover. I've had interviews with people that I've not necessarily agreed with their politics, but respect them and make them feel like you are a neutral party who is there representing your vast audience. That way, they know who you're all about. Which does bring me to one last point, I guess. The second to last thing I'd say. and that is make sure they understand who your audience is. So if your show is targeted to a specific group, explain that to the subject that you're interviewing. For example, when I interview people for our show, Producing Video Podcasts, I explain to them that they're talking to other people who podcast. Therefore, they don't have to talk down to them or explain some of the basics of the technology that most of you know already. Same thing holds true. If you do a show on agriculture and you have a lot of farmers, make sure the person you're talking to knows that so they could speak the language of the people listening. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Just a couple of quick tips on interview techniques. You can find out a lot more in our book, Producing Video Podcasts from Focal Press. And of course, check out the resource blog at vidpodcaster.com.